I sealed the facility 8 days before the outbreak began. At the time, it felt like a decision I would never need to justify. The structure had been abandoned long enough that no one questioned it anymore. No active power grid, no scheduled maintenance, no records that suggested anyone still cared what was inside. It existed in that space between forgotten and ignored, which made it exactly what I was looking for. Isolation without attention. That was the goal. The first time I walked through it, the temperature hit me immediately. Not extreme, but controlled in a way that didn't match how long it had supposedly been inactive. The walls held cold longer than they should have. The air felt stable, like the system had been designed to resist change even without power. That told me everything I needed to know. This place was built to preserve, and preservation works both ways. I didn't rush the decision. I mapped the structure first. Entry points, internal corridors, storage sections, pressure doors. The layout was simpler than most facilities of this type, but that made it more manageable. Fewer variables, fewer unknown pathways. At least, that's what I thought. The main entrance was reinforced already, but not enough for what I needed. I added an internal seal system, mechanical locks layered over the original structure, something that didn't rely on external power. Once engaged, it wouldn't open without direct input from inside. No automatic override. No external access. That part was intentional. If I was going to isolate myself, it had to be absolute. The secondary access points were easier to manage. Most of them had already been sealed during decommissioning, welded shut or blocked internally. I reinforced what remained, closing off anything that could become a weakness later. Every step followed the same logic. Remove uncertainty. Reduce entry. Control movement. By the time I finished, the facility wasn't just sealed. It was contained. That's when I made the mistake of thinking I understood it. The final day before I locked everything down, I did one last walkthrough, not checking for flaws, but confirming what I already believed to be true, that everything I needed was inside, that everything I didn't want was outside. That assumption didn't feel wrong. It felt complete. I remember standing at the main control point, looking at the manual seal system I had installed. It wasn't complex. A series of mechanical locks connected through a central lever. Once engaged, every reinforced point would close in sequence. No delay, no reversal. I hesitated for a moment, not because I doubted the system, because I realized what it meant. Once I pulled it, there was no easy way back. That was the point. I activated it. The response moved through the structure immediately. A deep mechanical shift, one lock engaging after another, each one reinforcing the next. The sound wasn't loud, but it carried. You could feel it more than hear it, like the building was adjusting to a new state. Sealed, contained, isolated. I stood there longer than I should have, listening to the silence that followed. Not empty silence, controlled silence. The kind that tells you something has changed permanently. At that moment, everything still made sense. I had a location no one would come to, a structure designed to resist change, a system that didn't depend on anything outside. It was exactly what I needed. Or at least it would have been if the facility had actually been empty when I sealed it. I didn't realize that right away. There were no signs, no movement, no sound that didn't belong. Just that same controlled stillness I had felt the first time I entered. But this time it felt different. Not wrong, just deeper. Like the cold wasn't just preserving what I brought inside, but something that had already been there long before I arrived. And now it was sealed in with me. I didn't choose a facility because it was safe. I chose it because no one else would. That distinction mattered more than anything else I considered at the time. Most people look for protection and visibility. Somewhere monitored, somewhere supported, somewhere that still connects to whatever systems remain functional. I was looking for the opposite. Distance, neglect, a place that had already been removed from anything that might fail later. The facility fit that perfectly. It wasn't just abandoned. It had been written off completely. No scheduled maintenance, no ownership disputes, no indication that anyone planned to return. Even the access road had started to break down, overgrown just enough to discourage casual movement. That reduced risk. No traffic, No attention. No reason for anyone to come near it unless they already knew it existed. That last part mattered, because I didn't want to be found. Not by people. Not by anything else. The structure itself was another factor. Cold storage facilities aren't built like normal buildings. They're designed to maintain internal conditions regardless of what happens outside. Thick insulated walls, controlled airflow, reinforced doors. Everything about it is built to resist change. That made it predictable. And predictability is what survival depends on. At least, that's what I believed. I ran through other options before settling on this one. Urban structures. Easier access to resources but higher risk. Remote shelters. Safer in theory but too exposed. Too dependent on external conditions. Underground systems. Stable but limited in ways that would become a problem over time. Everything had a trade-off. This one felt balanced. Strong structure. Limited access. Controlled environment. And most importantly, no immediate reason for anything to be there. That was the assumption everything depended on. I didn't ignore the risks completely. No place is perfect. The facility had been inactive long enough that I couldn't fully trust its internal systems. Temperature control, airflow, structural integrity. All of it had to be tested manually. I spent time checking what I could, reinforcing what I didn't trust, building my own systems over what remained. It wasn't fully restored, but it didn't need to be. It just needed a hold. That's the difference people underestimate. You don't need perfection. You need enough stability to survive longer than whatever you're avoiding. I also considered one more factor. Storage. Not just for supplies. For space. Cold storage facilities are designed to hold volume. Large sections segmented into controlled areas. That gave me flexibility. If something failed in one section, I could isolate it without compromising everything else. That was part of the design. Containment within containment. Layers. Redundancy. It all made sense on paper. It made even more sense when I stood inside it. But there was one detail I didn't account for properly. The temperature. It was too stable. Even without active systems, the internal environment held its cold longer than expected. Not freezing, not extreme, but consistent in a way that didn't match how long the place had been inactive. At first, I saw that as an advantage. Thermal stability without energy cost. Less power required. More efficiency. It looked like a benefit. Now I understand it differently. Stability without input means something is maintaining it. And I never confirmed what that was. I checked the obvious explanations. Residual insulation. Structural density. Environmental positioning. All of it contributed. None of it fully explained it. I accepted that anyway, because it fit the outcome I wanted. That's the part that matters. I didn't ignore the detail. I dismissed it. There's a difference. Ignoring means you never see the problem. Dismissing means you see it and decide it doesn't matter. That decision carried forward into everything else. Every system I built, every assumption I made, every step that led to sealing the facility completely. Because once you decide something is safe enough, you stop questioning it. And when you stop questioning it, you stop looking for what doesn't fit. Standing inside the sealed structure now, feeling that same control cold pressing evenly through every section, I realized something I should have understood earlier. I didn't choose a facility because it was the best option. I chose it because it matched what I wanted to believe. That isolation was enough. That structure was enough. That control was enough. And that nothing inside it could be a problem. That last assumption is the one I didn't test. And now I don't have a way to test it without breaking the one thing that's keeping everything else under control. The system is holding. The facility is stable. Everything is exactly as I designed it, except for one detail I can't explain. And the longer I stay inside, the more that detail starts to matter. I didn't trust the facility. So I built a system inside it, not because it was failing, because it was too stable. That was the part that didn't sit right with me. Most abandoned structures degrade. Systems break down. Conditions change. This place didn't. It held its internal state longer than it should have. And that kind of consistency only comes from design or something still influencing it. I didn't know which one it was. So I built around both possibilities. The first layer was access control. The facility already had reinforced entry points, but they were designed for storage, not containment. I needed something that worked differently, not just keeping things out, but controlling how and when anything could move between sections. So I added internal seals, mechanical locks manually controlled, independent from any original system. Once engaged, they didn't rely on power or automation. They were absolute. If a section closed, it stayed closed unless I opened it myself. That gave me control, at least in theory. The second layer was segmentation. Cold storage facilities are already divided, but I redefined those divisions. Each section became its own environment. If something changed in one, temperature, airflow, structural integrity, I could isolate it without affecting everything else. That mattered more than I realized at the time, because containment only works if you can limit spread, even when you don't know what might spread. The third layer was movement restriction, not barriers. Timing. I didn't want to rely only on structure. I wanted behavior control. So I created a simple rule system for myself: when to move, where to move, how long to stay in each section. It sounds unnecessary, but consistency reduces mistakes. And mistakes are what systems are built to prevent, especially when you're the only one inside. The fourth layer was monitoring, not advanced systems, just observation points, markers, manual checks, temperature readings across sections, airflow patterns, structural response over time. Nothing complex, just enough to detect change if something started shifting. Because if something changes inside a controlled environment, it matters. I kept it simple on purpose. Complex systems fail in ways you don't expect. Simple systems fail in ways you can track. That was the principle. And for the first few days, it worked exactly as intended. The facility remained stable. My systems held. Everything aligned with the assumptions I had built into the design. That should have been enough. It wasn't, because the more stable everything remained, the more I started noticing what didn't match. It wasn't obvious. Nothing you could point to immediately and say something is wrong. Just small inconsistencies. Temperature readings that didn't shift when they should have. Air that felt slightly colder in sections that weren't connected. A delay between opening one partition and the expected change in pressure across another. Each one minor. Each one explainable on its own. But patterns don't form from single events. They form from repetition. That's when the system changed for me. Not physically, mentally. I stopped thinking of it as something I controlled and started thinking of it as something I was testing. Every movement, every check, every adjustment, not to maintain stability, but to see if stability would break. Because if it didn't, then I wasn't the one controlling it. That thought stayed in the background at first. Easy to ignore. Easy to rationalize. Until I noticed something I couldn't explain. One of the inner sections was colder than the rest. Not dramatically. Just enough to stand out. That shouldn't have been possible. Not without active systems. Not without a reason. I checked the structure. No breach. No external influence. No airflow difference that justified it. I adjusted my system. Restricted access. Monitored more frequently. Still the same result. Stable. Too stable. That's when I understood something I hadn't considered during planning. I built the system to control the facility, but I never confirmed whether the facility needed controlling, because if it didn't, then everything I built wasn't managing the environment. It was containing it, and I didn't know which side of that I was on anymore. The system held. Everything looked correct. Everything functioned as expected, but that one section stayed colder than it should have been. And now that I had noticed it, I couldn't stop thinking about what might be causing it. Because, in a place designed to preserve, temperature isn't just a condition, it's a signal. And this one was telling me something I hadn't accounted for. Something inside the system wasn't behaving like the rest. And I hadn't built anything to deal with that. The first few days felt controlled. That's the easiest way to describe it. Everything inside the facility followed the structure I had built. Movement was deliberate. Systems were checked on schedule. Each section remained stable within the limits I expected. There were no sudden changes, no immediate threats, nothing that forced a reaction. That kind of consistency creates confidence, at least at first. I followed the system exactly as I designed it, rotated through sections at fixed intervals, checked temperature variations, monitored airflow differences, logged everything manually. Every action had a purpose, and every purpose reinforced the idea that I was in control. That belief didn't break immediately. It shifted, slowly. The first change wasn't something I saw. It was something I felt. The facility was too quiet. Not silent, but controlled in a way that removed natural variation. No external noise, no distant movement. Nothing that suggested the outside world still existed beyond the structure. Just a low, consistent presence of the environment holding itself together. At first, that felt like success. Isolation working exactly as intended. Then it started to feel different. Because complete isolation doesn't just remove threats. It removes reference. Time became harder to measure. Not because I didn't track it, but because nothing outside the system changed. No light shifts, no environmental cues, no variation to mark progression. The system cycles replaced everything, and once I adjusted to them, they stopped feeling like time. They felt like repetition. That's when the space started to change. Not physically, perceptually. Corridors that had felt structured began to feel enclosed. Sections that had seemed manageable started to feel separated in a way that wasn't just functional. Every boundary I had created became more defined, not as protection, but as division. I noticed it most when moving between sections. Each door wasn't just a barrier. It was a transition. Temperature shifts, air pressure changes, sound altering slightly depending on where I stood. The facility wasn't one space. It was multiple environments connected by controlled access. And I was the only thing moving between them. That awareness built over time. Not sudden, not overwhelming. Just consistent enough to stay present. The system still held. Everything still functioned. But the feeling of control started to change. Because control requires feedback. And the only feedback I had was coming from inside the system itself. That's when I went back to the colder section. Not because I needed to, because I couldn't ignore it anymore. The temperature difference was still there, unchanged, consistent. I checked it again. Same result. No fluctuation. No variation. That's what made it stand out. Everything else in the facility showed small changes over time. Minor shifts, barely noticeable, but enough to confirm that the environment was still behaving normally. This section didn't. It held its temperature exactly, as if something was maintaining it. I stayed there longer than I should have. Not doing anything, just observing, waiting for something to change. Nothing did. That should have reassured me. It didn't, because stability without cause isn't stability. It's control, and I wasn't the one controlling it. I stepped back and sealed the section again, not out of fear, out of caution. The system adjusted without resistance. Doors closed, pressure stabilized. Everything returned to normal, except for one detail. I started checking that section more often, not because I planned to, because I needed to confirm it hadn't changed. That's how patterns form. Repetition driven by uncertainty. And uncertainty doesn't stay contained. It spreads. The more I checked, the more I noticed other small details. Nothing as clear as the temperature difference, but enough to keep the thought active that something inside the facility wasn't fully under my control. The system still worked. Everything I built still functioned exactly as intended, but now there was a second layer to it. Something I hadn't designed, something I hadn't accounted for, something that didn't follow the same rules. And the longer I stayed inside, the more the isolation stopped feeling like protection and started feeling like separation, not from the outside, from understanding. Because whatever was happening inside this facility was happening within a system I had sealed completely. And that meant one thing. If something was wrong, I had already locked myself in with it. The first real sign wasn't visual. It was absence. I didn't notice it immediately. It took time, repetition, a pattern breaking in a way that didn't feel obvious until it was already happening. Up to that point, every section of the facility behaved within expected limits. Minor variations, small inconsistencies, nothing that suggested a system failure. Then one of those inconsistencies stopped changing. It was the colder section. the one I had already marked as unusual. At first, the temperature difference was subtle, just enough to stand out when compared directly to the others, but it still behaved like part of the system. Small fluctuations, minor shifts, nothing that felt fixed. That changed. I ran the check again during a standard cycle. Same result. No variation. Not lower. Not higher. Exactly the same. I waited for the next cycle. Checked again. Still the same. That's when it became a problem. Because even stable environments fluctuate slightly over time. Insulation, airflow, internal movement. Something always creates change. Even if it's minimal. This didn't. It held. Perfectly. I adjusted my monitoring approach. More frequent checks. Different intervals. Different positions inside the section. No difference. The temperature remained constant in a way that didn't match any passive system. That meant one of two things. Either something inside that section was actively maintaining it, or something about the section itself had changed in a way I didn't understand. Neither option was acceptable. I opened the partition again. Slowly. Not because I expected something to happen. Because I didn't want to miss it if it did. The air felt the same. Cold. Still. But there was something else now. Not a sound. Not movement. Just a difference in how the space felt. Subtle. Hard to define. Like the environment was holding itself more tightly than the rest of the facility. I stepped inside. Waited. Listened. Nothing. No movement. No visible change. Just that same controlled stillness. I checked the walls. Structural integrity was intact. No breach. No external exposure. No sign that anything had entered or exited. The system reading still showed nothing abnormal. That's what made it worse. Because if something changes and the system detects it, you have a reference point. If something changes and nothing detects it, you don't know what you're missing. I stayed longer than I should have. Long enough for the environment to feel normal again. That's how it works. If something doesn't change, your mind adjusts to it, accepts it, normalizes it. That's when I noticed the second problem. The door. It hadn't fully sealed behind me. Not open. Not closed. Just slightly delayed. I stepped back immediately and triggered the manual seal. It closed. Clean. No resistance. No error. I checked the system log. No delay recorded. That wasn't possible. I had seen it. Felt it. The timing was off. Even if it was small. I ran the cycle again. Opened the partition. Stepped back. Waited. This time it sealed correctly. No delay. No issue. The system showed everything normal. That should have resolved it. It didn't. Because now I had two problems. A section that didn't fluctuate. And a system that didn't register something I had just observed. Individually, both could be explained. Together, they formed a pattern. And patterns don't appear without a cause. I closed the section again. Fully sealed. Restricted access. Not because I confirmed something was wrong. Because I couldn't confirm that it wasn't. That difference matters. I returned to the main control point and reviewed everything again. Temperature logs. Airflow. Pressure distribution. Everything aligned with expected values. Everything looked correct. That's what made it worse. Because now I understood something clearly. The system wasn't showing me the problem, which meant the problem was inside the system. It was inside the facility itself. And the system I built was only tracking what I had told it to track. I stepped away from the console and looked back toward the sealed section. Nothing had changed. No sound. No movement. Just the same controlled silence. But now it felt different. Not because something had happened, because something hadn't. And in a place designed to preserve. A lack of change isn't always a good sign. Sometimes it means something is already stabilized into a state you didn't expect. And if that state isn't part of your system, then your system isn't controlling it. It's just containing it. I wasn't planning to open that section again so soon. But once you notice something you can't explain, leaving it alone doesn't feel like control. It feels like avoidance. And avoidance inside a sealed system is dangerous. Because if something is wrong, it's not going anywhere. I waited through one full cycle before going back. Not rushing. Not reacting. Just enough time to confirm that nothing else in the facility had changed. Every other section behaved normally. Temperature fluctuated slightly. Airflow shifted as expected. The system responded exactly as it should. Only that one section remained constant. That was enough. I approached the partition slowly, not because I expected something to happen, but because I didn't know what would happen if it did. The manual lock felt heavier this time, not physically, just in the way I hesitated before opening it. Then I released it. The door slid open. No resistance. No sound beyond the mechanism itself. The air inside felt the same as before. Cold, still, controlled. I stepped in again. Same position. Same distance from the walls. Same angle relative to the entrance. I didn't want to introduce variables I couldn't track. That's when I noticed it. Not immediately. Not clearly. Just something that didn't match the last time I was here. One of the storage racks wasn't aligned. It was a small shift, a few centimeters at most. Easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. But I had mapped this section. Every position. Every spacing. I knew how it was arranged. This wasn't the same. I moved closer. Slow. Deliberate. The floor showed no drag marks. No disturbance. No sign that anything had been moved across it. That made it worse. Because something had changed, without leaving evidence of how. I checked the surrounding area. Nothing else out of place. Just that one rack. Shifted slightly off its original position. I reached out and touched it. Cold. Solid. Exactly as expected. I applied slight pressure. It didn't move. That meant it hadn't been pushed recently. Or if it had settled back into place. That shouldn't have been possible. I stepped back and looked at the entire section again. That's when I saw the second change. Condensation. Not widespread. Not obvious. Just a thin line along the back wall. Too controlled to be random. Too localized to be normal. I checked the temperature reading again. Still stable. Exactly the same as before. That didn't match. Condensation requires variation. A shift. A difference between surfaces. Something changing. But the system showed no change. Which meant either the system was wrong, or the change wasn't being measured. I moved closer to the wall. The condensation line was precise. Almost straight. Not spreading. Not dripping. Just there, like it had formed and then stopped. I reached out and touched it. It was colder than the surrounding surface. Not by much, but enough to notice. I pulled my hand back immediately. Not because it hurt, because it didn't feel right. The temperature difference was too clean, too controlled. Like it wasn't reacting to the environment, but defining it. I stepped back again. Now I had 3 problems. A section that didn't fluctuate. A system that didn't detect deviation. And physical changes that didn't follow normal cause. That's when the thought shifted. Before, I had been trying to explain what was happening. Now I started questioning something else. What if this section wasn't changing? Because it had already reached the state it was supposed to be in? That possibility changed everything. Because if something stabilizes at a condition you didn't set, then you're not controlling the system. You're inside something else's. I turned toward the door. For a moment, I considered leaving it open, observing longer, trying to catch whatever was causing this. Then I stopped, because I understood something clearly. If I couldn't explain what I was seeing, then I didn't understand the rules of this environment anymore. And staying inside longer wouldn't fix that. It would just increase the chance of missing something worse. I stepped out, sealed the partition immediately. Manual lock engaged. No delay, no hesitation. Everything back to normal, except it wasn't. Because now I knew something inside the facility had changed. Physically, not just in data. And the system I built didn't detect it, which meant I wasn't monitoring the right variables. Or worse, there were variables I couldn't monitor at all. I stood there, looking at the sealed section, trying to decide what mattered more, understanding what was inside, or making sure it stayed contained. Because if something had already moved once, then it could move again. The temperature didn't change all at once. It shifted gradually. That's what made it harder to catch early. At first, it felt like normal variation, minor differences between sections, small adjustments that could be explained by insulation, airflow, or residual structural effects. Nothing that suggested failure, until the pattern stopped making sense. The colder section stayed the same. Everything else started drifting, not warming, not cooling evenly, just shifting in a way that didn't align. I noticed it during a routine check. One section read slightly higher than expected, not enough to trigger concern, still within acceptable limits. I adjusted my monitoring intervals and moved on. The next cycle, it shifted again. Different section, different reading. Still minor, still explainable, but not consistent. That's when it became a problem. Because inconsistency means loss of control. And loss of control inside a sealed environment spreads faster than anything else. I went back through the logs, compared readings across cycles, mapped changes against airflow patterns. Nothing matched. There was no central cause, no single point of failure, just variation moving through the facility without a clear source, except for one place. The cold section, unchanged, perfectly stable. That contrast made everything worse, because now it wasn't just inconsistency. It was isolation. One part of the facility holding steady, while the rest began drifting. I adjusted the system, increased monitoring frequency, reduced movement between sections, limited access to stabilize airflow. It helped, but it didn't fix it. The drift continued, slow, controlled, but real. That's when I felt it physically, not just in the data, in the air. Certain sections felt heavier, not warmer, not colder, just off, like the environment wasn't balancing itself properly anymore. I moved through each section again, carefully, tracking the changes, trying to find a pattern. There wasn't one, at least not one I could map. Every time I thought I saw alignment, it shifted again. That meant something was influencing the system dynamically, not static, not fixed, moving, adjusting, and I didn't know what it was. I stopped in the central corridor, looked at the layout in my head. All sections connected, all airflow linked, all temperature dependent on shared structure. If something affected one, it should affect all, unless something was isolating itself or controlling its own condition. That brought me back to the cold section. I didn't want to open again, but I couldn't ignore it. I approached the partition, stopped, listened. Nothing. No sound. No movement. Just the same controlled silence. That was the problem. Everything else was changing. This wasn't. That meant it wasn't part of the system anymore. Or it never had been. I checked the surface temperature of the door. Colder than the surrounding structure. Not by much, but enough. The difference had increased. That meant whatever was happening inside was affecting the barrier now. That shouldn't happen. Not without transfer. Not without cause. I stepped back, because now the problem wasn't contained to one section. It was starting to interact with the rest of the facility, and I didn't know how far that interaction would go. I returned to control point, pulled up all readings again. The drift was still there, still spreading, slowly, but consistently. The system wasn't failing. It was adapting, trying to compensate for something it didn't understand. That's worse than failure, because failure stops. Adaptation continues. And if the system is adapting to the wrong variable, it makes the situation worse over time. I reduced system load, stabilized airflow manually, locked down unnecessary movement. Everything I could do to limit change. It slowed the drift, but didn't stop it. That confirmed it. The source wasn't the system. It was inside the facility. And now it was affecting everything. I stood there, watching the readings update in real time. Every change small, every shift controlled, but moving in a direction I couldn't define. The cold section remained unchanged, still stable, still isolated, like the center of something I couldn't see yet. And now everything else was starting to move around it. That's when I understood something clearly. The problem wasn't temperature. That was just the first thing I could measure. The real problem was control. And I was starting to lose it, inside a sealed structure, with no way to step outside and reset anything. And whatever was causing it was still contained in the one place I hadn't solved, which meant sooner or later, I was going to have to open it again. Not to check, not to confirm, but to deal with it. And I wasn't ready for what that might mean yet. The system didn't break. It slipped. That's what made it dangerous. If something fails, you see it. You react. You fix it. But a slip is different. It hides inside normal operation, small enough to ignore, consistent enough to grow. I noticed it during a standard cycle. Nothing unusual on the surface. Temperature drifts still moving slowly across sections. Airflow adjustments compensating where needed. Everything within operational limits. Then one reading delayed. Not incorrect. Delayed. Less than a second. Barely noticeable. But the system wasn't designed for delay. Every process depended on timing. One action triggered the next. Airflow adjusted, pressure stabilized, readings updated in sequence. That order mattered. This broke it. I ran the check again. The delay repeated. Same section, same reading. That confirmed it. Not random, not noise. A pattern. I isolated the sensor. Checked hardware. No fault. Power stable. Connection intact. That meant the delay wasn't physical. It was processing. The system wasn't receiving the data late. It was waiting. For what? I didn't know. I traced the sequence. Temperature reading. Airflow adjustment. Pressure response. Everything linked. If one step slowed, the rest adjusted. That's what I was seeing. Not failure. Compensation. The system was adapting to something it couldn't measure directly. That's when the second delay appeared. Different section. Different sensor. Same pattern. Short pause. Then update. Now it wasn't isolated. It was spreading. I moved to the central interface and watched the cycle live. Each reading updating slightly out of sync. Not enough to trigger error, but enough to break precision. And precision is what the system depended on. I tried a manual refresh. Forced synchronization. For a moment, everything aligned. Then it slipped again. Worse this time. Longer delay. More sections affected. That's when environment changed with it. Airflow shifted too late. Pressure equalization lagged. Temperature adjustments applied after the condition had already changed. The system wasn't controlling the environment anymore. It was reacting to it. That's the difference between stability and collapse. I stepped back, watched the pattern, trying to understand what it was adapting to. Then I saw it. The cold section. Still unchanged. Still perfectly stable. Everything else drifting. And now the system adjusting around it. Not correcting it. Not measuring it. Just working around it. That's when it became clear. The system wasn't failing. It was prioritizing something else. Something inside that section. Something it wasn't designed to track, but was still influencing every process. I moved toward the partition again. Stopped halfway, because now the risk was different. Before, opening that section was about understanding. Now it was about exposure. If the system was already adapting to it, then whatever was inside wasn't isolated anymore. It was integrated. I returned to control panel and tried another correction. Reduce system load. Simplified processes. Force priority alignment. It held for one cycle, then slipped again. Worse. That's when the delay hit something critical. A partition seal. I watched it. The command triggered. The mechanism engaged. Then, pause. Half a second. Long enough to notice. Long enough to matter. Then it completed. That shouldn't happen. Not in a sealed system. Not in a controlled environment. Because delay and containment is risk. I ran the cycle again. Same result. Slight hesitation. Then seal. The system log showed no issue. Everything recorded as normal. That's when I understood the real problem. The system wasn't detecting the failure, because from its perspective, there wasn't one. It had adjusted its own timing. Redefined normal. That's what made it dangerous. Because now I couldn't trust the data. Only what I observed. And observation doesn't scale. Not in a system like this. I stepped away from the interface, slowly. Because the system I built to maintain control was now adapting to something I didn't understand. And every adjustment I made was being absorbed into that change. The cold section remained sealed, unchanged, stable, like the source of everything. And now the system itself was beginning to align with it, not resist it, not isolate it. Align. That's when the thought shifted completely. This wasn't system failure. This was a system transition. And I wasn't the one controlling what it was transitioning into, which meant one thing. The longer I waited, the more the system would adapt, and the less control I would have left when it mattered, because whatever was inside that section was no longer contained by the system. It was starting to define it. The system wasn't the only thing changing. My timeline was too. Up until that point, everything had been about control, maintaining the environment, tracking variations, adjusting systems before problems escalated. It felt structured, manageable, contained. That changed when I stopped focusing on the system and started focusing on what I had left. I went back to the storage section and checked everything again, not casually, not estimating, counting. Water reserves were stable, better than expected. The facility's insulation reduced loss, and my usage had been controlled. Even with extended time inside, water wasn't the immediate problem. Power came next, more complicated. The system adjustments I had made to compensate for temperature drift were increasing load, not dramatically, but enough to matter over time. Every delay, every correction, every adaptation added strain. The system wasn't running efficiently anymore. It was compensating. That meant higher consumption, shorter stability window, still manageable. For now, then food. That's where everything narrowed. I had planned for isolation, stocked enough to sustain a controlled environment, but I hadn't planned for instability. Higher stress means higher consumption, more movement, more monitoring, more mistakes if energy drops. I ran the calculation twice. Same result. Enough to last, not enough to wait. That's the difference. Survival wasn't immediate failure. It was a countdown, and now I could see it clearly. Every day I stayed inside, reduced my options, not just resources, decisions. I returned to the control point and pulled up system data again. Temperature drift still spreading, delays increasing slightly. Nothing catastrophic, but nothing stable either. The system was holding, but it was doing it by adjusting constantly. That's not sustainability. That's resistance. And resistance fails over time. I look back toward the cold section. Still sealed. Still unchanged. Still stable. Everything else moving around it. That's when the connection became clear. My resources were declining. The system was adapting. And the one constant was something I hadn't addressed. That meant one thing. As long as that section remained unresolved, everything else would continue shifting, and I would keep losing time. I considered reducing activity, lower consumption, extending the timeline. It worked on paper. Less movement, less monitoring, less strain. But that approach had a flaw. If the system degraded further, I wouldn't catch it in time. And a delayed response inside a failing system is the same as no response at all. I needed awareness, and awareness costs energy. That was a trade. Preserve resources or preserve control. I couldn't do both. I walked back to the storage area again, not because I needed to check it, because I needed to feel the limit. Shelves that once felt sufficient now looked finite. Every item represented time, and time was moving in one direction. I ran one more calculation. Worst case scenario. System instability increases. Consumption rises. Correction attempts fail. The timeline shortened. Not dramatically, but enough. Enough to force a decision. I went back to the console, opened the system control panel, then the partition access. The cold section. Still locked. Still contained. But no longer isolated. Not from the system. Not from the environment. Just from me. That's when the decision became clear. I could stay inside the system. Maintain what I had. Watch it degrade slowly while resources ran out. Or I could address the source, risk exposure, break containment if necessary, and try to regain control before the system adapted beyond my ability to manage it. Neither option was safe. One was passive, the other was active, and passive survival inside a changing system is just delayed failure. I hovered over partition control, didn't activate it, not yet. Because once I opened that section again, I wasn't just observing. I would be interacting with something I still didn't understand. The system continued cycling behind me. Delays, adjustments, compensation, everything still working, but not holding. And my timeline was no longer something I could extend without taking a risk. That's when I understood the real problem. This wasn't about survival anymore. It was about timing. Act too early, and I might create a problem I can't contain. Act too late, and the system won't matter anymore. And right now, I was running out of time to choose correctly. I didn't wait for another cycle. Waiting had stopped helping. The system was still running, but not reliably. Delays were increasing. Adjustments were stacking. Every second I spent observing without acting was another second the system adapted further away from what I understood. That meant one thing. If I was going to act, it had to be now. I stood at the partition control and ran through the sequence again in my head. Unlock, release pressure, open manually, observe, reseal if necessary. Simple. That's how it looked. But simplicity disappears the moment you don't understand what you're dealing with. I checked the system one last time. Temperature drift still present. Delays still spreading. The cold section, unchanged. That was the constant. And constants define systems. I activated the unlock. The mechanism responded immediately. No delay. That was the first difference. The system hesitated everywhere else. Not here. The pressure seal released with a controlled shift, air equalizing between sections. I felt it subtle but noticeable. The environment adjusting around a boundary that had been fixed until now. I waited. Nothing unexpected. No sudden change. No immediate reaction. That made it worse. Because I didn't know what to expect. I opened the partition. Slowly, the door slid back. The cold hit me harder this time. Not just temperature. Density. Like the air inside was heavier, more contained, resisting movement in a way that didn't match the rest of the facility. I stepped in. Careful. Measured. Same position as before. Same angle. Same distance. Everything looked the same. The rack was still shifted. The condensation line still present. Nothing visibly different. But something had changed. The space felt active. Not moving. Not reacting. Just present in a way it hadn't been before. I stayed still. Listened. Nothing. Then I took one step forward. That's when the system reacted. Behind me, the partition started to close. I turned immediately. The door was moving faster than it should have. Not slamming, but not following the delayed timing I had seen everywhere else. I moved back quickly and stopped it manually. The mechanism resisted. Not fully. Just enough to make it clear the system was trying to complete the cycle. That shouldn't happen. Not without command. I forced it open again, held it in place, then released it slowly. It stayed. No movement. No automatic closure. The system log showed nothing unusual. That confirmed it. The reaction wasn't being tracked, which meant the system wasn't controlling it. Something else was influencing it. I turned back toward the section. Now I wasn't just observing. I was inside something that had already responded once. That changed the rules. I moved deeper, toward the back wall, toward the condensation line. The temperature dropped slightly with each step, not dramatically, but enough to feel, enough to confirm that the gradient was increasing, not stable, directed. I stopped near the wall, reached out again. The surface was colder than before, more defined, less blended with the surrounding structure. That meant the condition was intensifying, not holding, changing. I stepped back slowly, because now the risk was clear. Whatever was inside this section wasn't static. It was progressing, and the system was reacting to it without registering it. I turned toward the exit again. The partition still open, still stable. For now, that phrase again. For now, I moved back toward it, one step at a time, not rushing, not triggering anything unnecessarily, because I didn't know what would cause another reaction. I reached the doorway, paused, looked back one more time. Everything still, everything controlled, except now I knew that control wasn't mine. I stepped out, activated the manual seal immediately. The door closed, clean, No delay. No hesitation. Faster than anything else in the system. That confirmed it. This section wasn't affected by the delays. It was overriding them. I locked it fully. Reinforced the seal. Stepped back. The system resumed its cycle around me. Delays still present. Adjustments still running. Everything continuing as before. But now I understood something I hadn't before. The system wasn't breaking randomly. It was changing in response to that section, aligning with it. And the moment I opened it, it reacted, not as a failure, as a function, which meant one thing. That section wasn't outside the system anymore. It was becoming part of it. And the more it changed, the more the system would follow. And now I had a new problem. I had confirmed the source, but I hadn't stopped it. And next time, it might not wait for me to open the door. I stopped ignoring the outside. Up until that point, everything had been focused inward. The facility, the system, the section I couldn't explain. Whatever was happening felt contained, limited to the space I had sealed. That assumption didn't hold anymore. If the system was adapting, then I needed to know what it was adapting against. I went back to the external access point, not to open it, just to observe. The facility didn't have a full monitoring system for the outside. No active cameras, no live feeds. That was part why I chose it. Less dependence on external systems. But it had one thing. A narrow observation panel near the main entrance. Reinforced. Limited visibility. Enough to see movement if something was there. I approached it slowly. Not because I expected something to be waiting. Because I didn't know what I would see if it was. I cleared the panel. Looked out. At first, nothing. Just distance. Broken terrain. The same empty space I had seen before sealing the facility. Then I noticed movement. Far. At the edge of visibility. Not clear. Not defined. Just something shifting against the background. I stayed still. Watched. Try and confirm it. The movement stopped. Then started again. Closer this time. Not approaching directly. Just moving through the space. That alone would have been enough to confirm something was out there. But it wasn't the movement that mattered. It was a pattern. It didn't match anything normal. No clear direction. No reaction to environment. Just movement that started and stopped without reason. That's when I realized something. The outside wasn't empty. It was just distant enough that I hadn't noticed. Until now, I stayed there longer, tracking it, trying to understand if it was random. It wasn't. More movement appeared. Not all at once. Not coordinated. But present. Separate. Unconnected. And none of it moved toward the facility. That part mattered. Because if they were reacting to presence, they would approach. They didn't. That meant one of two things. Either they didn't know I was here, or something else was keeping them from coming closer. I stepped back from the panel, thought about the system, the changes, the cold section, the way everything was beginning to align around it. Then I looked outside again. The movement had shifted, closer now, still not approaching directly, but within a range that made it relevant. That's when the connection formed. Before, I thought the problem was internal. Something inside the facility affecting the system. Now, I wasn't sure where the boundary was anymore. Because if the system was adapting to something inside, and something outside was moving within range, then those two things might not be separate. I moved away from the panel and returned to the control point. Checked the system again. Delays still present. Drift still spreading. Nothing stabilized. Everything adjusting. Then I checked the timing. Compared internal cycles to what I had observed outside. There was no direct match, but there was overlap. Periods of increased movement outside, lined up with moments of increased delay inside. Not exact, not precise, but close enough to matter. That shouldn't happen. The system wasn't connected to the outside. Not directly. No sensors. No input. No feedback. Which meant the connection wasn't in the system. It was in the environment. Something affecting both. Inside and outside. At the same time. That's when the situation changed completely. This wasn't a contained problem. It wasn't something I could isolate inside the facility. It wasn't something I could solve by adjusting systems or sealing sections. It was larger than that, and I was in the middle of it, I went back to the observation panel one more time. The movement outside had increased, not closer, but more frequent, more present. Like whatever was out there was becoming more active. I stayed there long enough to confirm it, then stepped back, because watching it didn't give me control. It just gave me information. And information without action doesn't change the outcome. I returned to the center of the facility, looked toward the sealed section, looked back toward the entrance. Two directions, both unknown, both connected now, and the system still running between them, trying to adapt, trying to hold, but no longer fully in control of either. That's when I understood something clearly. The problem wasn't inside. It wasn't outside. It was the interaction between both. And I had sealed myself at the exact point where those two things were starting to connect, which meant whatever happened next wouldn't stay contained to one side, and I wouldn't be able to control both at the same time. I wasn't expecting communication. Up to that point, everything had been observation, watching the system shift, tracking movement outside, trying to understand patterns without interacting with them. That kept things controlled. Distance creates safety, or at least the illusion of it. The signal broke that completely. It started as interference, a brief fluctuation in one of the internal monitoring lines. Not temperature, not airflow, just a minor disruption in the baseline readings, something I had seen before and dismissed as system noise. Then it repeated, same interval, same duration. That's what made it different. Noise doesn't repeat cleanly. I isolated the channel, reduced everything else, focused on that single input. The pattern became clearer, not strong, not stable, but structured. 3 pulses, pause, 2 pulses, then silence. Then it repeated. I replayed it, slowed it down, compared across cycles. It held, not perfectly, but intentionally. That meant one thing. It wasn't random. Something was generating it. I checked the system. There was no source, no internal process that matched the pattern, no function that could produce that kind of output, which meant it wasn't coming from inside the system, but it was inside the facility. That narrowed it down. There were only 2 possibilities. It was coming from the sealed section, or it was coming from outside and somehow reaching inside. Neither option made sense. The facility wasn't connected externally. No active receivers. No transmission systems. Nothing that could carry a signal through. Unless it wasn't using the system at all. I moved toward the cold section again. Stopped a few steps away. Listened. Nothing. No sound. No movement. But the signal continued. 3. Pause. 2. I checked the timing. Compared it to the system cycles. There was overlap again. Not exact, but close. That meant it wasn't independent. It was aligning with something. Either the system or whatever was affecting it. I turned toward the entrance. Went back to the observation panel. Looked outside. Movement again. More frequent now. Closer. Still not approaching directly, but no longer distant. I stayed there. Watched. Then the signal repeated again. Stronger this time. Not louder. Clearer. That's when the connection became impossible to ignore. The signal wasn't just inside. It wasn't just outside. It was crossing. Whatever was generating it was interacting with both. That changed everything. Because up until now, I had 2 problems. Internal instability. External uncertainty. Now they were linked. I went back to the control point. Opened the system interface. Then the partition control. Then paused. Because this was the point where observation ended and interaction began. If the signal was coming from the sealed section, opening it would expose me directly. If it was coming from outside, responding to it could draw attention. Either way, the system would no longer be enough. I hovered over the control, didn't activate it, because I needed to understand one thing first. Was the signal trying to reach me, or was it reacting to something else entirely? That distinction mattered, because one implies intent, the other implies coincidence, and acting on the wrong one could be the last decision I get to make. The signal repeated again. 3. Pause. 2. Unchanged. Persistent. Waiting. That's what it felt like now. Not random, not passive, waiting. I moved my hand slightly closer to control. Stopped, because I understood something clearly. The moment I respond, I become part of whatever this is. Not separate, not observing. Involved. And involvement inside a system that's already unstable is risk without control. But doing nothing isn't control either. Not anymore. Because the system is already changing. The environment is already shifting. And whatever is generating that signal is already part of both, which means I'm already involved, whether I act or not. That realization removed the last layer of hesitation, not because it made the decision easier, because it made it unavoidable. I looked at the control one more time, then at the system, then toward the sealed section, then toward the outside, all connected now, all part of the same problem. And no clear boundary between them anymore. The signal repeated again. 3. Pause. 2. This time, I didn't step back. Because the next phase wasn't about understanding. It was about choosing. And whatever I chose would change everything that comes after. The system didn't warn me. It shifted. Right after the signal repeated again, I felt it before I saw it. A slight change in the air pressure, barely noticeable unless you were paying attention. Then the delay hit, not in one section. Everywhere, all at once. The system paused. Not completely, but enough. Long enough to break synchronization. That's when everything started moving out of alignment. Doors cycled late. Airflow adjustments lagged behind demand. Temperature readings updated in uneven intervals. Nothing failed, but nothing matched anymore. That's worse, because failure is clear. This wasn't. I moved to the control interface immediately. The system was still responding, but slower, not delayed in one place. Delayed across the entire network. That meant the timing structure was compromised, not broken, but shifting. I tried a manual sync, force reset of the timing cycle. For a moment, everything aligned. Then it slipped again. Faster this time. That's when I realized the problem. The system wasn't losing control. It was being overridden. Not directly, not through commands. Through influence. Something was forcing it to adapt beyond its own parameters. I turned toward the cold section. The door was still sealed, but the temperature reading had changed. Not drifting, dropping. For the first time since I had been here, it was moving, and everything else in the facility was reacting to it. I stepped back, because now the system wasn't just adapting. It was following. The signal repeated again, louder, clearer, not in the system, in the space itself. 3. Pause. 2. This time, I didn't need the interface to hear it. That meant it wasn't just data anymore. It was physical. I moved toward the partition, not slowly this time, because hesitation didn't matter anymore. The system wasn't stable enough to rely on. I reached the door. The surface was colder than before. Noticeably, the difference had increased. That meant whatever was happening inside was accelerating. I accessed the manual override, triggered the release. The door didn't open immediately. Half-second delay. Then it unlocked. I pulled it open. The cold hit hard, sharper, more defined. The air inside moved slightly, not from airflow, from difference, like pressure was shifting toward something. I stepped inside. This time, everything was different. The condensation line had expanded, no longer a thin mark, now a defined boundary across the wall. And the rack had moved again, further, more noticeable, without any sign of how. That confirmed it. Something inside the section was changing physically, and it wasn't following normal rules. The signal repeated again, closer, not from the system, from the space. That's when I saw it. Not clearly, not fully, just a distortion near the back wall, like the air itself wasn't holding its shape correctly. Subtle, easy to miss, but real. I stopped moving, because now I understood the risk. If this was the source, then I wasn't observing it anymore. I was inside it. The system reacted again. Behind me, the door started to close, faster than before. I turned immediately, moved toward it. but stopped halfway. Because something else had changed. The system wasn't just reacting to the section anymore. It was reacting to me being inside it. That's when the realization hit. The signal, the system, the environment, they weren't separate. They were part of the same process. And I had just stepped into the center of it. The distortion shifted slightly. Not toward me, not away, just adjusting. That was enough. I moved back to the door, forced it open fully, stepped out, triggered the seal. The door closed. Harder this time. Faster. No delay. That confirmed it. The system wasn't just adapting anymore. It was prioritizing containment. I stepped back, watched the interface. Everything unstable. Everything shifting. But holding. For now. The signal continued. 3. Pause. 2. Unchanged. Persistent. Now louder than before. Because I had confirmed something I couldn't ignore. The source wasn't outside. It wasn't just inside. It was the interaction between both. And now the system was caught in it, trying to contain something that wasn't static, something that was expanding. And I had just triggered it. Not by accident, by action. That's when the situation became clear. The system wasn't going to fail all at once. It was going to be pushed, adjusted, redefined, until it no longer worked the way I built it. And when that happened, containment wouldn't mean safety anymore. It would mean being trapped with something I couldn't control. I looked at the control panel, at the partition, at the entrance. All options still available. For now, but not for long. Because whatever I had just seen wasn't holding its position anymore. And the next time I opened that door, it might not stay inside at all. 8 days before the outbreak, I thought I understood what survival meant. Seal the structure, control the environment, remove uncertainty, let the system do the rest. That logic held in the beginning. The facility worked. The system worked. Everything I built did exactly what it was designed to do. But survival didn't come from any of that. Not really. The system didn't fail me. But it didn't carry me either. That's the difference I understand now. It created space. Time. A controlled environment where problems didn't escalate immediately. But it didn't solve anything. Every real decision still came from me. And most of those decisions weren't part of the plan. The temperature drift. The system delays. The section that didn't behave like the rest. None of that was in the design. And the system couldn't adapt to it on its own. It responded, adjusted, compensated. But it didn't understand. That part required me. And that's where survival actually happened. Not in the structure. Not in the system. In the ability to recognize when both were no longer enough. I went back through everything. Every change. Every moment I chose to act instead of wait. Every time I stepped outside the system's intended behavior. That's where the difference was. The system removed hesitation. But survival required controlled hesitation. Knowing when to follow it. Knowing when to override it. Knowing when to ignore it completely. That balance wasn't something I built. It's something I learned. Inside a sealed structure. With no margin for error. The facility is still holding. The system is still running. But neither of them are what they were at the start. They've changed. Adapted. Not by design. By pressure. And that pressure didn't come from one place. It came from both sides. Inside and outside. Meeting somewhere in the middle. That's where I am now. Between two systems I don't fully understand anymore. The one I built. And the one that's forming around it. The signal is still there. 3 pulses. Pause. 2. Unchanged. After everything. After system instability. After environmental shifts. After seeing something I still can't fully explain. It hasn't stopped. That matters. Because nothing else has stayed consistent. Not the facility. Not the system. Just that. I didn't respond at first. The risk was too high. The system wasn't stable enough. I didn't know what I would be connecting to. Now, that calculation is different. Not safer. Clearer. The system can still hold. For now. But it's not a long-term solution. It's a delay. And delays don't solve problems. They give you time to choose how to face them. That's what this has become. Not survival. Decision. I moved back to the control panel. Looked at the partition. Looked toward the entrance. both still options, both carrying risk. Stay inside. Maintain containment. Let the system continue adapting until it can't. Or step beyond it. Break isolation. Engage with whatever is outside. And whatever is already inside. Because at this point, they're not separate anymore. I hovered over the controls. Not uncertain. Not hesitant. Just aware. Because this isn't about making the safe choice. That option is gone. It's about making the correct one. And those aren't always the same. The signal repeated again. 3. Pause. 2. This time, I understood it differently. Not just as a pattern, but as a constant. Something stable in a system where everything else was changing. That makes it important. That makes it worth the risk. I placed my hand on the control. Didn't rush. Didn't delay. Because timing is what this has always been about. Act too early, and you create a problem you can't control. Act too late, and you lose the ability to act at all. Right now, I'm still in between. That's the only advantage I have left. The system is still holding. The facility is still sealed. Everything's still contained. For now. But I know something I didn't when this started. Containment doesn't mean safety. It just means the problem hasn't reached you yet. And now, it's close enough that I can't ignore it anymore. The signal repeats again. 3. Pause. 2. I press the control. And for the first time since I sealed this facility, I stop trying to survive inside the system and start preparing to survive beyond it, because whatever happens next won't be contained, and it won't wait for me to be ready.